The morning sun was barely up when David pulled his old white van into the fancy neighborhood. He'd been here before, many times actually, but it never got less intimidating. Mansion after mansion lined the street, each one bigger and more impressive than the last. His van, with its peeling paint and the dent on the passenger side, looked completely out of place among all the shiny luxury cars parked in perfectly manicured driveways. David had been tuning pianos for 17 years now. Okay, so, at 45 years old, his hands told the story of hard work. They were rough, with calluses on his fingertips from years of adjusting strings and testing keys. His jacket was clean but old, the kind you wear when you know you'll be working all day. He didn't mind how he looked. Honest work was nothing to be ashamed of. He checked the address one more time on the crumpled work order, the Hartwell estate. Mrs. Catherine Hartwell called the company specifically requesting their best tuner for an emergency job. Her charity gala was tonight, and apparently something was off with her piano. David smiled to himself. People always waited until the last minute, then called it an emergency. The driveway seemed to go on forever. When he finally parked near the service entrance at the side of the house, David grabbed his toolbox and headed to the door. Before he could knock, it swung open. A woman in her early 60s stood there, perfectly dressed even at 8 in the morning. Her gray hair was styled in an elegant cut, and she wore more jewelry before breakfast than most people owned in their lifetime. Her eyes swept over David from head to toe, and he could see the exact moment she decided he wasn't good enough. "You're the piano tuner?" she asked, her voice dripping with doubt. "Ma'am, David Peterson. I'm here about the Steinway." She sighed. The kind of sigh that said she was already disappointed. "I specifically told them I needed their premium service. This is a very important event tonight. Very important people will be here." David had heard this speech before. He just nodded politely. "I understand, ma'am. I've been doing this for 17 years. Your piano will be perfect." Mrs. Hartwell didn't look convinced, but she stepped aside to let him in. "Service entrance leads to the grand hall. The piano is there, and please be careful. That instrument is worth more than most people make in 5 years." He wanted to say that he knew exactly how much it was worth, that he'd worked on dozens of Steinway concert grands just like it. But he'd learned a long time ago that some people didn't want to hear it. They'd already made up their minds about who you were based on how you looked. The grand hall was breathtaking. The ceiling had to be 20 feet high, with crystal chandeliers hanging like frozen waterfalls. Large windows let in streams of morning light that made everything glow. And there, in the center of it all, sat the piano. A magnificent black Steinway that probably cost more than David's house. He set down his toolbox carefully and ran his hand along the piano's edge. Beautiful instrument. Could tell it was well maintained, probably played regularly. Mrs. Hartwell hovered nearby, watching his every move like he might steal the silverware. "I'll need about 2 hours," David said, opening his toolbox and pulling out his tuning hammer. "Maybe a bit more if there are bigger issues." 2 hours? Mrs. Hartwell's eyebrows shot up. "It's a premium tuner who came last year only needed 90 minutes. David smiled patiently. "If you'd like me to rush it, I can. If you want it done right, I'll need the time." She huffed, but walked away, her heels clicking against the marble floor. David could hear her in the next room, already on the phone. With someone complaining about the tuner they'd sent her, he tried not to let it bother him. This was just another job, another day of dealing with people who looked down on him. He began working, starting with the middle keys, listening carefully to each note. The piano was actually in pretty good shape, just needed some minor adjustments. It's nothing that justified calling it an emergency, but that wasn't his problem. About an hour into his work, he heard voices. Multiple women, all talking and laughing. Mrs. Hartwell's friends were arriving early to help set up for tonight. David kept his eyes on his work, trying to be invisible. "Catherine, darling, your home looks absolutely stunning." One voice called out, "Thank you. The caterers will be here at noon and the florist should arrive any moment." "Oh, don't mind him, he's just the piano tuner." David glanced up briefly and saw 3 women in expensive clothes standing at the entrance to the grand hall. They were all looking at him like he was part of the furniture. "I assume," one of them said, not bothering to lower her voice. Mrs. Hartwell laughed. "I know, right? I asked for their best, and this is what they send. But what can you do? It's last minute." The women moved closer, champagne glasses already in their hands, even though it wasn't even 10 in the morning yet. David focused harder on the piano keys, his jaw tightening slightly. Just keep working, he told himself. Just get through it. Does he even know what he's doing? Another woman whispered, though it was the kind of whisper meant to be heard. He looks like he just rolled out of bed. More laughter. David's hands stayed steady, even though something inside him was starting to burn. He'd dealt with this his whole life. People judging him, dismissing him, treating him like he was less than human just because he worked with his hands. One of the women, wearing a bright red dress that probably cost more than David's monthly rent, walked right up to the piano. She leaned against it casually, smiling down at him. "So, do you actually play, or do you just twist the little knobs?" David paused for just a second, looking up at her. "I play, ma'am." This seemed to delight her. "Oh, Catherine, did you hear that?" "He plays." She turned back to David. "What do you play, chopsticks? Happy birthday?" The other women burst into laughter. Mrs. Hartwell joined them, clearly enjoying the entertainment. "I bet he doesn't even read music," one of them said. "Probably learned everything from YouTube videos," another added. David felt his heart pounding. These women had no idea. None of them had any idea. He could feel the weight of the keys under his fingers, familiar and comforting. It had been so long since he'd really played, since he'd let himself do more than just test the tuning. He'd spent years hiding this part of himself, burying it deep because it hurt too much to remember what he'd lost. Mrs. Hartwell walked over, emboldened by her friend's amusement. She crossed her arms and smiled down at him. "You know what? I'd love to hear you play. Show us what you can do. Consider it part of the service." The other women gathered around, pulling out their phones. This was going to be their entertainment for the morning. The poor piano tuner making a fool of himself. David's hands rested on the keys. He could walk away, could pack up his tools and leave, tell the company to send someone else. But something in Mrs. Hartwell's smug expression stopped him. Something. About the way these women looked at him, like he was nothing. Like his life and his work and everything he'd been through meant nothing. "If you insist, ma'am," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. He adjusted his position on the bench, his worn jacket stretching across his shoulders. The women exchanged knowing glances, already giggling in anticipation of the disaster they expected. David closed his eyes and placed his fingers on the keys, feeling the smooth ivory beneath his rough, calloused hands. For just a moment, everything else faded away. The mansion, the mocking women, the years of struggle and sacrifice. All that existed was him and the piano. Then he began to play. The first notes that came from the piano weren't what anyone expected. Instead of some simple tune or fumbling melody, David's fingers struck the keys with absolute precision. The sound that filled the grand hall was powerful, commanding. It's impossible to ignore. He was playing Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3. Not a simplified version. Not the easy parts. The full piece, one of the most difficult compositions ever written for piano. The kind of music that made professional concert pianists nervous. Mrs. Hartwell's smile froze on her face. The woman in the red dress actually took a step back, her champagne glass tilting dangerously in her hand. The phones that had been raised to record what they thought would be an embarrassing moment were now capturing. Something entirely different. David's hands moved across the keyboard like they'd been doing it forever. His fingers flew over the keys so fast, they almost seemed to blur. The rough, calloused hands that these women had mocked just moments ago were creating music that most people only heard in the world's greatest concert halls. The piece started powerful and dramatic, filling every corner of the massive room. The crystal chandeliers seemed to vibrate with each note. The morning sunlight streaming through the windows created shadows that danced with the rhythm of the music. It was as if the entire house had been waiting for this moment. For someone to finally bring this piano to life, Mrs. Hartwell stood completely still, her mouth slightly open. She'd been about to say something mocking, had the words ready on her tongue. But they'd vanished the second the music started. Her hand holding her phone was shaking slightly. She had to grip it with both hands to keep recording. The woman in the red dress slowly sank into a nearby chair, her eyes wide with disbelief. She'd been laughing just 30 seconds ago. Now she looked like she'd seen a ghost. The other two women had moved closer together as if they needed to hold on to something. Their earlier amusement completely gone. David's eyes were closed as he played. His whole body moved with the music, swaying slightly, his shoulders rising and falling with the emotion of each phrase. This wasn't just technical skill. This was something deeper. Every note carried feeling. You could hear joy and pain, hope and loss, all woven together in the complex melody, the difficult passages that made even professional pianists practice for months came easily to him. His left hand pounded out the deep bass notes, while his right hand danced across the higher keys, playing runs of notes so fast and complicated it seemed physically impossible. But he made it look effortless, natural. It's like this was simply who he was. Mrs. Hartwell's friend, the one who'd asked if he only knew chopsticks, had tears forming in her eyes. She blinked them away quickly, not wanting to ruin her makeup, but she couldn't stop them. The music was doing something to all of them, breaking through their expensive clothes and jewelry and fancy manners to touch something real underneath. The piece moved through different emotions like a journey. Sometimes it was thunderous and powerful, making the windows rattle. Other times it became soft and delicate, so quiet that everyone held their breath, afraid to miss a single note. David controlled it all with perfect precision, knowing exactly when to push and when to pull back. Around the 5-minute mark, one of the women pulled out a chair and sat down, unable to stand any longer. The music was overwhelming. This wasn't supposed to happen. The piano tuner wasn't supposed to play like this. He was supposed to be nobody, just the help, someone to laugh at and then forget about. Mrs. Hartwell's phone was still recording, but she'd lowered it slightly. She was watching David's face now, really looking at him for the first time. His expression as he played was peaceful, almost sad, like he was somewhere far away. Like this music was taking him to memories that hurt, healed at the same time. The technical difficulty of what he was doing couldn't be overstated. There were moments where both hands crossed over each other in impossible patterns. Times when he had to stretch his fingers across keys that seemed too far apart. Sections where the rhythm changed so quickly that counting it seemed impossible. But David navigated all of it perfectly, never hesitating, never making a single mistake. The woman in the red dress whispered something to her friend, but even she couldn't hear her own words over the music. It didn't matter anyway. There was nothing to say. All they could do was watch and listen and try to understand what was happening. About 8 minutes in, the piece reached one of its most famous sections, a series of rapid chords that required incredible hand strength and coordination. David attacked the keys with controlled power, each chord ringing out clearly before immediately flowing into the next one. His years of piano tuning had kept his hands strong, even if he hadn't been performing. Mrs. Hartwell's expensive watch caught the light as her hand trembled. She was thinking about the phone call she'd made earlier, complaining about the tuner they'd sent. She was thinking about every dismissive look she'd given him, every condescending word. The recording on her phone was already uploading to her social media, posted automatically by her phone's settings. She didn't even realize it yet. The other women were experiencing their own private revelations. The one who joked about YouTube videos was remembering her own childhood piano lessons. How she'd quit after just a year because it was too hard. The one who'd said he looked like he rolled out of bed was thinking about her husband, who worked 16-hour days and came home exhausted, and how she sometimes made him feel small without meaning to. David moved into the final section of the piece, building toward the climax. The music grew more intense, more passionate. His whole body was engaged now, leaning into certain notes, pulling back on others. Sweat had formed on his forehead, not from difficulty, but from the sheer emotional intensity of what he was playing. The Grand Hall had never heard music like this. Oh, Mrs. Hartwell had hosted plenty of events with professional musicians. She'd paid orchestras to perform at her parties, but those were always polite, background entertainment. This was different. This was raw and real and absolutely commanding. You couldn't ignore it. You couldn't talk through it. All you could do was listen. 10 minutes in, and none of the women had moved. They were frozen, caught in the spell of the music. Mrs. Hartwell's champagne had gone warm in her hand. The red dress woman's phone had gone to sleep mode in her lap. Time seemed to have stopped, or maybe just slowed down, stretching each moment into something longer. The piece required not just technical skill, but incredible stamina. Playing it all the way through without stopping was exhausting, but David showed no signs of tiring. If anything, he seemed to be gaining energy from the music itself, feeding off of it, using it to fuel his performance. Around the 11-minute mark, Mrs. Hartwell noticed something on her phone. Notifications were flooding in, dozens of them. Her hands shaking, she glanced down at the screen while still trying to watch David play. The video she'd posted was already being shared. People were commenting. A lot of people. The numbers were climbing rapidly. She looked back up at David, her face pale. Something was happening here that she didn't fully understand yet. This wasn't just a piano tuner playing well. This was something else entirely. But what? The final minutes of the piece were approaching. David's fingers never slowed, never faltered. He was completely lost in the music now, in a place where mocking words and judgmental looks couldn't reach him. A place where the only thing that mattered was the sound, the feeling, the pure expression of something too big for words. And as the piece moved toward its powerful conclusion, all four women watching knew with absolute certainty that their morning had taken a turn none of them could have predicted. The man they'd laughed at, the piano tuner in the worn jacket, was about to change everything. The final notes of the concerto rang out through the grand hall like a declaration. David's hands came down on the last powerful chords with perfect timing, holding them just long enough before releasing. Then silence. Complete, absolute silence that seemed to echo louder than the music itself. David sat still for a moment, his hands resting on the keys, his eyes still closed. His chest rose and fell with deep breaths. Slowly, he opened his eyes and looked down at the piano, almost surprised to find himself there. It had been so long since he'd let himself play like that. So many years of holding back, of staying quiet, of being invisible. He stood up carefully, straightening his worn jacket. Then he walked back to his toolbox, as if nothing extraordinary had just happened. As if he hadn't just performed one of the most difficult piano pieces ever written, with the skill of a world-class concert pianist. He picked up his tuning hammer like he was ready to get back to work. The four women were still frozen. Mrs. Hartwell's mouth was open. No sound came out. The woman in the red dress had mascara-stained tears running down her cheeks. The other two were clutching each other's hands without even realizing it. Finally, Mrs. Hartwell found her voice. It came out as barely a whisper. "Who are you?" David didn't look up from his toolbox. "I'm the piano tuner, ma'am. David Peterson." Just like I said, no. Mrs. Hartwell shook her head, her perfectly styled hair not moving an inch. "No, you can't be just a piano tuner. That's impossible. What you just played? That was..." She couldn't finish the sentence. She didn't have the words. The woman in the red dress stood up suddenly, her phone clutched in her hand. Her fingers were flying across the screen, typing frantically into a search engine. "David Peterson," she muttered. "David Peterson, pianist. David Peterson, piano." The other women gathered around her, looking at her phone screen. Mrs. Hartwell's own phone was buzzing nonstop in her hand with notifications. But she ignored it, moving closer to see what the search had found. "Oh my God," the red dress woman breathed. Her face had gone completely white. "Oh my God, Catherine. Do you know who this is?" Mrs. Hartwell grabbed the phone, her hand shaking so badly she almost dropped it. Her eyes scanned the screen, growing wider with each word she read. There were old articles, reviews, photographs from 20 years ago. A young David Peterson in a tuxedo, standing on stage at Carnegie Hall. David Peterson winning the international piano competition. Critics calling him a genius. A once-in-a-generation talent. "The future of classical piano. You're him," Mrs. Hartwell whispered, looking up at David. "You're David Peterson. The David Peterson. You played at Carnegie Hall. You won the Van Cliburn competition. The critics said you were going to be the greatest pianist of your generation." David closed his toolbox slowly. He'd known this moment would come eventually if he ever played like that again. Part of him had been running from it for years. Another part had been waiting for it. "That was a long time ago," he said quietly. "A long time ago." The red-dress woman's voice was rising with emotion. "You disappeared? Everyone wondered what happened to you. There were articles speculating about it. You were everywhere. And then suddenly you were just ... gone." Mrs. Hartwell was scrolling through her phone now, reading frantically. "It says here you were supposed to tour with the Berlin Philharmonic. You had contracts with recording companies. You were going to be famous? What happened?" The other women were searching on their own phones now, finding the same articles, the same old photographs. A brilliant young pianist who'd vanished from the music world without explanation. It had been one of those mysteries that people in classical music circles still talked about occasionally. Where did David Peterson go? David sat down on the piano bench, suddenly looking very tired. He'd spent so many years avoiding these questions, avoiding this conversation. But maybe it was time. Maybe after all these years of silence, it was finally time to say it out loud. "My mother got sick," he said simply. "Cancer. Stage 4. The doctors gave her maybe a year, possibly less." The room went quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet now. The women stopped scrolling, stopped searching, and just listened. "My father had passed away 2 years before that. Heart attack. It was sudden. My mom was all I had left." David's voice was steady, but there was pain in it, old pain that had never fully healed. "When she got diagnosed, I was getting ready for the Berlin tour. I had everything lined up. The whole world was opening up for me." Mrs. Hartwell lowered her phone, her expression changing from shock to something else. Something that might have been shame. The doctor said she needed full-time care. She didn't have insurance that would cover everything. The treatments were expensive. Really expensive. And she needed someone with her, especially near the end. David looked down at his hands, those rough, calloused hands that had just created such beautiful music. I was her son. There was no one else. So I canceled the tour, canceled all of it. "But surely there was some way," one of the other women started to say. "Some kind of support system, or ... David shook his head. "Maybe for some people, not for us. We weren't wealthy. My dad had been a bus driver. My mom worked at a grocery store. I grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment. The only reason I learned piano was because my elementary school had a music program that was free. Everything I became, all that talent everyone talked about, it came from public school teachers who believed in me and gave me extra lessons for free." He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the perfectly manicured gardens. "I took care of my mom for 3 years. The doctors were wrong about the timeline. She fought hard. During the day, I worked whatever jobs I could find that had flexible hours. At night, I sat with her. Toward the end, I'd play for her on a little keyboard I bought at a pawn shop. Nothing fancy, but it made her happy." The woman in the red dress was crying openly now, not even trying to hide it. The others weren't far behind. "She passed away 7 years ago," David continued, "and by then, I was nobody. The music world moves fast. They'd found new talents to celebrate. My name didn't mean anything anymore. I tried to get back into performing, sent out recordings, reached out to old contacts, but I was yesterday's news. The guy who'd thrown away his big chance." Mrs. Hartwell's phone was still buzzing constantly. The video of David playing was going viral, spreading across the internet at an incredible speed. But she wasn't paying attention to it anymore. She was looking at David with an expression of complete horror at what she'd done. "So I became a piano tuner," David said with a slight smile. "It was honest work. It kept me close to music, and it paid the bills. That's all I needed. I've been doing it ever since." He turned back to face the women. "I didn't play like that to show off or to make you feel bad. I played because you asked me to, and because part of me needed to remember, needed to know I could still do it, that I hadn't lost everything." Mrs. Hartwell looked down at her phone. The video had tens of thousands of views already. Comments were flooding in from all over the world. Musicians recognizing him, people sharing memories of his old performances. The entire classical music community seemed to be waking up to the fact that David Peterson had been found. "You haven't lost anything," she said softly, her voice shaking. "That performance was... I don't have words for what that was." David picked up his toolbox. "Well, the piano's tuned now. It should be perfect for your event tonight. If you'll excuse me, I have another appointment across town." He started walking toward the door, but Mrs. Hartwell moved quickly to block his path. Her face was streaked with tears, her makeup ruined. She looked nothing like the polished, superior woman who'd greeted him at the door just a few hours ago. "Please," she said, "please don't go. Not yet." David stood there with his toolbox, looking at Mrs. Hartwell blocking his way. Her face was completely different now. The arrogance was gone. The smugness had vanished. She looked almost desperate, and maybe for the first time in years, genuinely humble. "I need to apologize," she said, her voice cracking. "What I said to you, how I treated you, how we all treated you, there's no excuse for it, none." The other women had gathered behind her, nodding. The one in the red dress stepped forward. "We were horrible. Absolutely horrible. We judged you the second you walked in. We made fun of you. We tried to humiliate you for our own entertainment." She wiped at her eyes. "And you're a better person than any of us could ever hope to be." David shifted his weight, uncomfortable with the attention. "Look, I appreciate the apology. I do, but this happens all the time. People see the worn jacket and the old van and they make assumptions. I'm used to it. It's fine." "It's not fine," Mrs. Hartwell said firmly. "It's not fine at all. And what makes it worse is that your talent, your sacrifice, everything you gave up. None of us had any idea. But even if you were just a regular piano tuner with no special gift, we still had no right to treat you that way." David nodded slowly. That was actually true. That was the part that mattered most. Mrs. Hartwell looked down at her phone again. The notifications had slowed down, but only because there were too many for the phone to keep up with. "David, do you know what's happening right now? This video of you playing has gone everywhere. I'm getting messages from people I haven't heard from in years. Concert promoters, music journalists, orchestra directors. Everyone is asking about you." She turned the phone so he could see the screen. The video had hundreds of thousands of views now, and it was still climbing. The comments were from all over the world. People were tagging major news outlets, famous musicians, concert halls. Someone had posted a comparison video showing clips of David's performance 20 years ago next to this morning's recording. The skill was still there, maybe even better than before. "They want to find you," one of the other women said, reading over Mrs. Hartwell's shoulder. "Look, this comment is from the director of the Chicago Symphony. This one is from a recording studio in London. David, they all want to know if you're available." David felt something strange in his chest. It might have been hope, but he wasn't sure anymore. He'd buried that feeling so deep for so long. "That's nice of them to say, but I have a job. I have appointments scheduled for the next 2 weeks. People are counting on me to tune their pianos." "Cancel them," Mrs. Hartwell said immediately. Then she caught herself. "I'm sorry that came out wrong. I'm not trying to tell you what to do. But David, this is your second chance. How often does life give us that?" The woman in the red dress was still scrolling through the comments. "There's a message here from the Metropolitan Opera House. They're asking if you'd consider performing at their winter gala. They're offering... Oh my God. They're offering $50,000 for one performance." David's eyes widened. That was more than he made in an entire year of tuning pianos. Mrs. Hartwell took a deep breath. "I want to make this right. What I did, what we did, I can't take it back. But maybe I can help fix what got broken all those years ago." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Tonight's charity gala, there are going to be 300 people here. Doctors, lawyers, business owners, philanthropists, people with connections to every major institution in the state. I was going to have a string quartet play during dinner." She looked directly at David. "I want you to play instead. I want you to perform at my gala tonight." David shook his head immediately. "Mrs. Hartwell, I appreciate the thought, but I can't. I haven't performed publicly in 20 years. I don't have the right clothes. I don't have sheet music prepared. I'm not ready. You just played one of the most difficult pieces in the classical repertoire perfectly from memory, she countered. You're more ready than you think. As for clothes, my husband is about your size. We can get you a proper suit. And sheet music. David, you don't need it. Everyone just watched you play 12 minutes of Rachmaninoff without looking at a single page. The other women were nodding enthusiastically now. This could change everything for you, one of them said. All the right people will be there. They'll hear you play. They'll see what we saw. David set down his toolbox and rubbed his face with both hands. This was all happening too fast. A few hours ago, he was just showing up to do a routine tuning job. Now these women were talking about relaunching his entire career. I don't know, he said honestly. It's been so long. What if I freeze up? What if the pressure is too much? When you're playing alone in a grand hall for 4 people, that's one thing. But performing for 300? That's different. Mrs. Hartwell stepped closer. David, I watched you play this morning. You weren't nervous. You weren't showing off. You were just being yourself. That's what made it so powerful. You poured everything into that music. Your loss, your sacrifice, your love for your mother. Every person in this room felt it. That's what real artistry is. She pulled out her phone and started typing. I'm canceling the string quartet right now. The spot is yours if you want it. No pressure, no obligation, but I think you owe it to yourself to try. I think you owe it to your mother's memory. She fought for 3 extra years. You gave up everything to be with her. Don't you think she'd want you to have this? That hit David hard. He thought about his mom, about those last days when she was so weak she could barely sit up. But she'd still smile when he played for her on that cheap keyboard. Play something beautiful, she'd whisper. Remind me what the world sounds like when it's good. His mother had felt guilty about what he'd given up. He knew that. She'd apologized 100 times, even though she had nothing to apologize for. When I'm gone, she'd told him once, promise me you'll find your way back to the music. Don't let my sickness be the end of your dreams, he'd promised her. But then she'd died, and the promise seemed impossible to keep. Until maybe now, if I do this, David said slowly, I do it my way. I'm not performing to impress anyone or to prove anything. I play the music I want to play, the pieces that matter to me. Absolutely, Mrs. Hartwell agreed immediately. Whatever you want. This is your performance. David looked at the 4 women standing in front of him. A few hours ago, they'd been laughing at him, mocking him, treating him like he was beneath them. Now they were offering him a chance to step back into the life he'd lost. It was strange how quickly things could change. Okay, he said finally. I'll do it. The women broke into smiles, actual genuine smiles. The red-dress woman clasped her hands together. You won't regret this. I promise you won't regret this. Mrs. Hartwell was already making phone calls, adjusting the evening's schedule, spreading the word that something special was going to happen at her gala. She paused and looked at David.
Thank you.
Thank you for giving us a chance to make this right. And thank you for reminding us that we should never judge people by their appearance. That lesson was worth more than any piano tuning. David picked up his toolbox one more time. I should go home and practice. If I'm really doing this, I want to be ready. Wait, Mrs. Hartwell said. Before you go, I need to know. What are you going to play tonight? David thought for a moment, a small smile forming on his face. Something my mother loved. Something that tells a story about finding your way home, even when you thought you'd lost the path forever. He walked toward the door, and this time no one stopped him. But as he reached the exit, he turned back. Mrs. Hartwell, thank you for the opportunity and for the apology. Both mean more than you know. Out. As David drove away in his old white van, his phone started ringing. Word was already spreading. The classical music world moved fast, and news of David Peterson's return was traveling like wildfire. Tonight's performance wasn't just going to be a charity gala anymore. It was going to be the comeback of a lifetime. David spent the afternoon in his small apartment, sitting at the old upright piano he'd bought years ago at an estate sale. His fingers moved across the keys, warming up, remembering. The muscle memory was still there. It's buried under years of tuning other people's instruments. Instead of playing his own music, he thought about what he was going to play tonight. It needed to be perfect. Not technically perfect, though he'd make sure of that too. It needed to be emotionally perfect. Something that would honor his mother's memory and maybe, just maybe, help him finally forgive himself for all the years he'd spent hiding around 4 in the afternoon. There was a knock on his door. It was a delivery, a garment bag with a note from Mrs. Hartwell. Inside was a beautiful black suit, perfectly tailored, with a crisp white shirt and black tie. The note said simply, "Thank you for tonight. You're giving all of us a gift, Catherine." David held the suit up to the light. It had been so long since he'd worn anything like this. The last time was probably his final performance before his mother got sick. He'd been so young then, so full of confidence and dreams. Now he was older, marked by loss and struggle. But maybe that wasn't such a bad thing. Maybe the music would be deeper for it. By 6:30, David was driving back to the Hartwell estate. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The circular driveway was packed with expensive cars now, valets running back and forth. David parked his old van in the back, feeling out of place again. But this time, for different reasons, Mrs. Hartwell met him at the door herself. She looked stunning in an elegant evening gown, but her expression was nervous. "David, thank God. I was worried you might change your mind." She looked at the suit. "It fits." "Perfectly," David said. "Thank you for this." For all of this, she led him through the house to a small room near the grand hall, where he could change and prepare. "There are about 280 people out there right now," she said. "I told them we had a special surprise performance, but I didn't say who. I thought the impact would be greater if they didn't know." David nodded, his heart starting to beat faster. 280 people. It had been so long since he'd played for a real audience. "David," Mrs. Hartwell said softly, "I need you to know something. This morning, when I posted that video, I had no idea it would spread like it did. It's been viewed over 2 million times now. News outlets are calling. There are people who flew in from other states just on the chance they might hear you play tonight. This has become bigger than either of us expected." David felt the weight of that information settle on his shoulders. 2 million views. People traveling to hear him. This wasn't just a charity gala performance anymore. This was his official return to the world of music. Mrs. Hartwell asked, seeing the expression on his face. David took a deep breath. "I'm scared," he admitted. Terrified, actually. "But I'm also ready. I think I've been ready for a long time." "I just didn't know it." Mrs. Hartwell squeezed his hand. "You're going to be magnificent." "I know it." She started to leave, then turned back. "Oh, and David, there are some people in the audience you should know about. The director of the National Symphony is here. So is a talent agent from New York who represents some of the biggest names in classical music. And there's a documentary filmmaker who wants to talk to you about your story." After she left, David changed into the suit and looked at himself in the mirror. He looked different. Not just because of the expensive clothes, but because something in his eyes had changed. There was light there again. Hope at 7:45, Mrs. Hartwell appeared at his door. It's time. The grand hall had been transformed. Hundreds of candles provided a warm, flickering light. The guests were seated in rows of elegant chairs facing the piano. The room fell silent as David walked in, and he could hear whispers starting to ripple through the crowd. "Is that really him?" Someone whispered. "David Peterson? I thought he was dead. Saw the video this morning. It has to be him." David walked to the piano, his heart pounding so hard he was sure everyone could hear it. He sat down on the bench, adjusted his position, and looked out at the sea of faces watching him. Some were curious. Some were skeptical. Some looked moved just by the fact that he was there. Mrs. Hartwell stood at the front of the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here tonight. What you're about to witness is something very special. This morning, a man came to my home to tune my piano. I treated him poorly. I judged him based on his appearance, based on assumptions I had no right to make. What I didn't know was that This man gave up everything, his entire career, his dreams, his future, to take care of his dying mother. The room was completely silent now. You could hear people breathing. His name is David Peterson. 20 years ago, he was being called the greatest pianist of his generation. Tonight, he's giving us all a gift. The gift of his music and the gift of a lesson about humility, sacrifice, and what really matters in life. Please welcome him. The applause started softly, then grew louder. David felt tears forming in his eyes, but he blinked them back. He placed his hands on the keys and thought about his mother one more time. This one's for you, Mom. He began to play Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, third movement. It was his mother's favorite piece, the one she'd asked him to play over and over during those final months. It started quietly, almost hesitant, like someone finding their way in the dark. Then it built, becoming more complex, more passionate, more alive. David poured everything into the music. 20 years of loss. 20 years of wondering what might have been. 20 years of quiet dignity in the face of people who looked down on him. But also 20 years of loving his mother enough to give up his dreams. 20 years of knowing he'd made the right choice. Even when it hurt, the piece moved through its complicated passages with fierce intensity. His fingers flew across the keys with the same precision he'd shown that morning. But now there was an audience feeling every note, sharing every emotion. People in the front rows were crying openly. Others sat with their hands pressed to their hearts in the back of the room. The documentary filmmaker was recording everything, tears streaming down his face. The talent agent from New York was already typing on his phone, clearing his schedule for the next month. The symphony director was thinking about a concert season that suddenly needed to be completely reimagined. But David wasn't thinking about any of that. He was thinking about his mother's smile, about the way she'd close her eyes when he played for her, about how she'd whisper beautiful, so beautiful even when she was too weak to speak above a whisper. The piece reached its powerful, dramatic conclusion. David's hands came down on the final chords with perfect force and timing. The last note rang out through the grand hall and slowly faded into silence. For a long moment, nobody moved. The silence stretched on, heavy with emotion. Then, from somewhere in the middle of the room, someone stood up and began to clap. Then another person stood. Then another. Within seconds, the entire audience was on their feet. Applauding THUNDEROUSLY. David stood and bowed, and for the first time in 20 years, he felt complete. He'd kept his promise to his mother. He'd found his way back to the music. And he'd learned that sometimes the longest journeys take us exactly where we need to be. Mrs. Hartwell was crying in the front row, and when David looked at her, she mouthed two words, "Thank you." But David shook his head slightly and mouthed back, "No, thank you." Because the truth was, if she hadn't mocked him that morning, if she hadn't pushed him to play, he might have spent the rest of his life tuning pianos and wondering what if. Sometimes our greatest gifts come wrapped in our most painful moments. Sometimes the people who hurt us end up being the ones who save us. As the applause continued, David looked up at the chandelier overhead and smiled. He could almost hear his mother's voice, clear as day, play something beautiful. Remind me what the world sounds like when it's good? Tonight, he'd done exactly that. And tomorrow, the real journey would begin.